Thanks, Steve, again for spending some time with us. Um, I'm gonna kind of jump right into things. So these are kind of strange times we're in. So much so that we're doing this interview remotely rather than in person for safety's sake. Last week, the U.S. reached 200,000 deaths due to COVID-19. How do you rate the president's handling of this crisis?
Well, I, when we have to go back to the beginning, and I think one of the things is that once he realized or was told or came to a decision that he immediately stopped any incoming flights from China. I think one of the things that we found now is that as we go along, much like anything, we're learning as we're going. I think what we found out because of this is that we had a dependency on external countries for some of the things that probably should have been done more internal to the United States with more control. I believe that there's a lot of things out there that can be misleading about like the number of deaths. Clearly, this is a pandemic. Clearly, this is a situation that is affecting many, many people. I don't necessarily believe that it's as dire. Anytime we lose a life, and don't get me wrong, it's dire. But when this first came out, there was, I think I read a report that upwards of 3 million people in the United States were going to die, and certainly we haven't come to that. And so I think what we need to do is realize the true impact of what this has happened. I think our response to this COVID-19, I think, has been, even within our state, has been as good as it possibly could have been. We learn every day. I think we're getting better at it. I think where we were, we actually then kind of receded to protect ourselves. And now that I think we know a lot more about what this thing is, I think we could do some things a little bit better. But quite frankly, I think anybody that would have been in that situation would have done whatever they thought was best at the time. And so I think the president did as good as he could, given the information that he was getting.
Okay. And so if you were uh, elected to Congress as a lawmaker, this is probably still going to be a situation that needs to be dealt with a couple months from now. Uh, what would you propose to turn things around, both economically and in terms of public health?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that there is a universe of individuals that are more susceptible to this, and I think we need to do everything we can to protect them and put things in place that allow them to know that whether it's the elderly in an assisted living facility, that we protect them, and also those people that are providing that kind of care and comfort to those individuals. I got to tell you, I got to believe we got to start opening up this economy. I think we can do some things a little bit smarter. I think when we shut down based on what we thought was the right thing to do, we had a reaction to that we saw that this economy receded and shrunk. We've lost. I'm a small business owner myself, and I had to lay off people because of how we reacted to the pandemic. I think we need to start doing some things to allow the economy back up, get people back to work, to get people off of unemployment, get them back to work. And then I would look at, what are those things now that we're 6-8 months smarter? What were those things that we found that were critical needs that we actually had a dependency on, and primarily in China? And how do we bring some of those things back so that we have more of a control of our destiny? And I'd be looking at legislation that actually relieves some of the dependencies we have on foreign entities and look at some of those things that we can do, certainly within the borders of the United States.
And do you see a need moving forward for more spending by the federal government? And if so, at what level?
Well, that's a great question, Billy. If you remember last time I ran, I am not a spender. I am a fiscal hawk, and I don't think that we've used our money judiciously. And this, that first relief package, I think, was $3 trillion that added on top of a debt that's crushing this country. I think for me personally, I think there's a very simple litmus test. Does this money have anything to do directly to the COVID-19 pandemic? If the answer is no, then we shouldn't even be entertaining it. But I think we have to be realistic about it. I believe I personally participated in the payroll protection plan program, which helped me bridge. It was never intended to be a replacement. It was intended to be a bridge to get us back. So I'm slowly getting my small business back on it. I got to tell you, I probably would not have voted for that $3 trillion package, only because there was a lot of things in there that from what I read, was not directly would pass my litmus test. But we certainly have a congresswoman that voted for that. I'm more of a fiscal hawk. I believe that there are ways that we could be more judicious with the money. I do believe that the money could be better spent in those areas that needed it. So I would do that. I would just be writing blank checks and to just put out more money out there without really realizing what the effect is and the long-term impact to the economy.
I just ask what you mean by directly related to COVID-19. Is that purely a public health matter? Because, for instance, the governor has been calling for increased federal funding to aid state and local governments. Is that something you're opposed to?
No, I'm not opposed to that, sir. When I would work directly with the governor, if there were some things that he needed to ensure that the response to the COVID-19 pandemic was helpful through federal dollars, I would certainly sit at the table and talk with them about that. It isn't necessarily about those frontline people. I'm not talking about masks or those kind of things, even though those things are important. But if there are some things that help states to be able to maintain some sort of a status quo going forward, then I would be in favor of that.
So I have a question that comes from, we actually surveyed our community members to find out what they wanted to know about the candidates on certain issues. So just following up on the COVID questions, what do you think should be done to prepare for future pandemics?
Sure. I mean, that's, we've always talked about, in my background in the military, we always had these what if exercises of situations. I think what we did, and we found out now, there's a lot of things that this country is at risk for. And I think that we can talk about this one, which was a biological situation. I think we need to be more concerned about how do we deal with some of those countries that possess or pose a biological threat to us. It is clear right now if this agent had been one of really truly intending to hurt, if you will, this country, I think they found a path of least resistance on how they can get it into this country. I think we need to learn from that. I think we need to take everything in a holistic view and how do we prevent another biological from coming in. It's about awareness. It's about, we can't be so isolationist that we don't still deal in a global market or global economy. But I think there's some things now that the after action that we're going to see that we could have done some things better. I'm not privy to all of those necessarily, but certainly that has to do with intelligence gathering and what things and countries are doing to try to protect the United States. Because, the president and every president previous and the next one's coming up have a national security strategy. And the number one pillar of this current national security strategy is to protect the American people. And I think we've got to find some ways that we can do that better moving forward.
Excuse me. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about some of the differences between, this campaign that you're running this year and your experiences last time around. What are some of the things that have been different between these two campaigns? And, what have you learned over the last 2 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talk about that every day when we come into the campaign office. Certainly the thing about it is we were not able to do what we would like to do with voter contact early on. We were not able to go and knock on doors. We were not able to go into neighborhoods. And really what that ended up was how do we then tack our boat to be able to still maintain somewhat of a contact presence with the voters. So I got to tell you, what we did is that we spent a lot more money on big, large signs, 4x8s, so that, name recognition is a big deal for us. One of the things that we found in the 2nd Congressional when we ran in 18 is, you have to have name recognition in the 2nd Congressional. Our district, just geographically, is very challenging. It's not like the 1st CD, with all due respect to my brethren in the 1st CD, they can do that district in one day. We go all the way, as to Vermont, all the way north to Canada. And so it is about being able to get out there and reach the constituents and talk to them. That's one thing I believe that Congresswoman Custer has not done a good enough job of, is being back in the state and talking to the constituents. So for us, primarily, we really lacked, and we had a bunch of college students that were chomping at the bit to go and knock on doors. Once some of the things kind of relaxed a little bit, we went out with our masks, we knocked on doors, and quite frankly, there were a lot of people that wanted to come and answer the door and to talk to people and to get some of the stuff off their chest, because, they've been pretty much quarantined, if you will, for the last 3 or 4 previous months. So that was the biggest deal for us, was getting out there, talking to constituents. Our phone bill was crazy because that's all we're doing was calling. Now we're absolutely out there being able to talk to the constituents. And I got to be honest with you, Mia, that was good for me. It was good for the kids that were on the campaign. It was good for the constituents.
Are there things, Steve, that are not related to your campaigning, but on issues that you feel differently about, or have a different perspective on 2 years later?
Sure, Bill. Well, one of the things, certainly, we haven't really changed the candidate who we are, right? Those typical conservative planks about Second Amendment and life, none of those things, quite frankly, are being talked about right now. The things that are being talked about is safety, public safety in their neighborhoods, be honest with you, and about this COVID. Is there an end state? Is the government doing enough to provide some sort of a protection to citizens going forward? And those are the things that are moving the needle. When we talk to people, there's a lot of unrest about what's happening across this country, about some of the things that you're hearing and seeing. And there's a lot of folks out there that don't want their town or their hamlet, to be a Kenosha, Wisconsin. And that's a real fear with them. And so we try to tell them is that, we believe in peaceful protest. I certainly do. I'm a product of the 60s. I get it, where you can have peaceful protests and move the needle on some things. But I think some of the things they've seen on social media and on television and reading makes them a little uneasy. And they just want to make sure that at some point in time that, we'll allow the ability to have open dialogue. But this kind of unrest really makes people uneasy.
Last time you were running, we know that you said that one of the reasons why you decided to get involved was because you felt like Washington was broken.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you would be interested in pursuing if elected to pursue cooperation and compromise among your fellow legislators?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. One of the things that I did when I was in the State House, I was fortunate enough to serve in the State House when we were in the majority, is to find those things that you do have mutual agreement on. And it's unfortunate. We probably agree with each other on more things than not. But the unfortunate aspect of that is the stuff that we don't agree on is the one that takes all of the airway times. I mean, it's the one that's just being put out. And I would sit and talk to anybody, whether it was another Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or an independent, and say, are there some things that we can do collectively that's in the best interest of not only New Hampshire and the 2nd Congressional, but the country? And I promise you, there are those things that are out there. I just think people are afraid to do that because it goes against their party's narrative. And I think we need to have the courage to say no. The courage is to do the right thing, sometimes in spite of the political leaning that you have. Because you know what? I think it was Reagan who said that if we agree 80% of the time, we're not enemies. And I think right now it's unfortunate that we have these little battle lines that are drawn. Nobody wants to go across the line. But I think there's plenty of things that are out there that we can do together that can be cooperative in nature and help the country go forward.
I wonder if you could offer some specifics as to what some of those might be.
Sure, absolutely. The first thing, and I would sit shoulder to shoulder with anyone that wants to talk to me about debt reduction. I'm not a big spender. I don't believe in spending. We are now in a situation where I personally believe that the national debt is one of, if not the most biggest national security issue that this country is facing. So I would look at those things that would help reduce the debt across this country. I look at some ways in how we could bring manufacturing back to this country and not be dependent on overseas. I look at some things that, we have for so many years, put some things offshore. Number one, ask the question, why did we do that? Why did manufacturers do that? And how can we work together to bring some of those things back, not only facilities, but jobs, and look at everybody, Democrat or Republican. If people are working, people are happy, people are spending money, I think those are the kind of things that we can work together to do things. And I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to move that kind of that position forward.
Kind of following up on that, when you were with us 2 years ago, you said, if there's something that's good for New Hampshire, then that's my fight. You have to be willing to stand up to the party. So
Yes,
what's an issue that you could see yourself breaking with Republican leadership?
Well, it's kind of interesting. You'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but the needs of the 2nd Congressional District are so varied. If you go north to COAS, the whole idea of infrastructure is a big deal for them. As we got I think there was 9 towns that was able to get better broadband through the COVID-19 emergency funding that was out there. I believe there's some folks in the party that believe that we don't have to spend that kind of money to do those things. I personally believe now that we've looked at, we've opened the aperture, we have more at-home people working, we have more at-home kids going to school. And so I would be looking at those kind of things of spending money, which is kind of contrary to not only me, but also my party, of not spending money, to do those things to help those people in the rural parts of the state. And even in the western part along the Connecticut River Valley, are there some things that's in the best interest of the congressional district that I would go against my party? It wouldn't be the first time I've done that. I did that when I was in the state house and went against the governor when I didn't vote for the governor's budget the first time, because to me there was too much discretionary spending. So, my whole career, I've always been one that's, there's right is right, depending on whatever the wind is blowing. And so I'm not afraid to go against my party because if that's the right thing for the second congressional, that's what I'll do.
So, yeah, Steve, also when we had you to our offices, we had a kind of spirited discussion on climate change. And so, 2 years down the road, maybe things look a little bit different. So one of your takes was, well, we've got to get everybody agreeing on what's going on. And you propose getting scientists in the room. But even if the scientists don't all agree on the cause, clearly something is happening, in a shift in our climate. And shouldn't we be taking measures to deal with what that's going to do to our economy and health and such?
Absolutely, Bill. And I agree with you. One of the things I think that the spirited discussion we had is that I think when you look at, for example, the Green New Deal, you have such huge and sweeping changes that I think that are draconian that I'm not so sure they merit implementation right now. Look, as a scoutmaster, when I took the kids on, I was a scoutmaster for 15 years. I want to preserve the natural and the beauty of my state just as much as the next person. And so there are things that we can do to provide those kind of protections. I'm all for that. I just think sometimes when we look at the situation that, I would work with the state to make sure that there's something federally that we can do. I'm all for it. I hope I never did come off the same, there isn't any change. Certainly there are some things that are out there that are changing. We do evolve. I remember when the ozone was a big issue, we got rid of ozone depleting chemicals and substances so that we would protect that ozone layer. So I think there's some smart things that we can do to go forward, but I would want to make sure that it's measured, that we take those things and do them in manageable chunks. We can't boil the ocean. So I would take, if there's some things that I know that are beneficial to my state to protect the natural beauty that we have, I absolutely would be all in favor of that.
And so what might be specific steps that you think we ought to be looking at? Obviously, you're not a fan of the big package new Green Deal, but
Right.
Are there things, some approaches that you can say right away, here's a thing that I think we ought to be looking at?
Sure. When I look at it, as a manufacturing perspective, for example, I would look at, are there some things that manufacturers are doing right now that are creating a toxic environment within our country or within our state? One of the things we saw on the seacoast with these PFOAs, as an example, that there were some things that were contaminating our water. The problem becomes is that everybody's looking to the federal government to establish what those standards are through the EPA. And I would say, what does New Hampshire believe that we should be doing to make sure that we maintain, because what's happening in our state may be different that's happening in Wyoming or California or Missouri. So, those are the kind of things, if in fact we see that those things are contaminating water, we absolutely should put some constraints in place and to hold businesses and manufacturing facilities accountable so that we can maintain those kind of things that are precious and dear to us. Because remember, it's only one planet. We've got to make sure we conserve our natural resources.
So shifting gears to the national debt, which we talked with you about a couple of years ago as well, and it's still a top priority for you, it sounds like. when we talked last time, you talked about zero-based budgeting as one of
Yes.
your proposals. What other proposals do you think would help to combat the national debt?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm a DoD guy, retired military. My business does work with the DoD. The GAO did the very first Department of Defense audit. I think it was last year or the year before. That to me, that's just insane. Where you have this an ability for an entity like the Department of Defense to run really unchecked, and quite frankly, areas where there's fraud, waste, and abuse. I think we need to put a top-down level, an independent arm, and I don't know if it's the GAO or the Office of Management and Budget, but to go into these agencies with the full authority to say, you know what, we have found these things that are wasteful. And I can tell you firsthand, and in my experience right now, there's that in abundance in the Department of Defense. But because there's no construct to be able to go into these agencies and to identify them and then show cause why those things could still be continued, I think we need to do something different. I think nothing is sacred. These agencies run, quite frankly, open loop. They just think they're getting the same budget year over year over year. And I believe that there's a responsibility of Congress to make sure, since they're the controllers of the purse, that there's some teeth into those kind of audits that say, you have to do less with less, and have a measure of expectation. And that's what I would do. And hold these people accountable, because quite frankly, in my opinion, Cecily, they're not accountable. And every year these budgets get bigger and bloated, and nobody's being held accountable to execute to those budgets.
And just to follow up to that, what about programs like Medicare and Social Security that are so vitally important to so many
Yes.
people, but you have to balance that against the cost, and how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, those people that are dependent on that, we need to find a way to make sure that those stay static, and we don't take away that entity that people are using right now. But it's a very simple equation, right? There are more people going to be drawing out of these than putting in. And so we have to do some things fundamentally. I am not for getting rid of Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. That's not what we're talking about. But we have to have a hard discussion. And how does it morph to still maintain the people that are utilizing it today? And how does it morph to 20, 30 years from now? And is it a different model than what it was 40 years ago? Because we're at a breaking point, right? Right now, when you look at some of this stuff, we need to do something fundamentally to make sure that what is being utilized today will still be there in some form or fashion in 20 years or 25 years. And we have to have some hard discussions. And so when I talk about debt reduction, when I say everything's on the table, it doesn't mean everything gets cut. But I do believe that we have to look at what are the equations and the algebra going into those things going forward. And I think we can do a good job by still maintaining a robust ability for people that are utilizing it today to still maintain it.
Also asked, part of debt reduction, there's two parts of the equation. There's the revenue side as well, and a
Right.
big driver of the increase in the debt over the last few years has been the tax cut that was
Right.
implemented. Do you foresee any needed changes in the tax code, for instance, to the extent it may benefit different?
Sure. Right. Well, first of all, I got to tell you, Tom, when we did that tax break in 17, the one thing that I disagree with the president, that there was no commensurate debt reduction with it. You can't just give tax breaks, because that's just going to increase the debt. And I did not see personally any of the counterbalance to that happening. I would look at, quite frankly, simplifying the tax code to do those kind of things. The tax code, I think, is now 75,000 pages with all amendments to it. It gave rise to an industry. So you got all these companies out there doing your own taxes for you. I think we can be simpler. I think we can be fair. I think everybody needs to pay their fair share. But I think it's so cumbersome right now that there's so many ways to navigate through the tax code that we have right now that it takes a PhD just to try to find the people that are utilizing it. But frankly, I believe that we can have a simpler tax code that's fair for the entire country. I would not be in favor of a tax reduction if there isn't a commensurate debt reduction package along with it.
I would like to pivot to another, very important issue in modern discourse, which is the situation with racial justice and policing reform. What do you feel that Congress should do if you were elected to address those issues and improve, not only policing but also, race relations?
Sure. Well, being a 100% Hispanic, I've been exposed to some of these things that people are talking about. My situations were different. I always knew that when it was a law enforcement officer, was the way I raised, that I followed direction and did what I was asked to do. I got to tell you, this question has come up to me a lot, Mia, because of my background. I believe right now that the unrest that's out there is the same kind of feeling that I had in the late 60s, where we seemed like we were always sitting on a powder keg, and no matter what situation would happen, it would ignite something somewhere. Look, we're not perfect. There are absolutely ways that we can do better and to treat each other, not necessarily just from one race to another, but just as individuals, to treat each other better. I think that the police force, not from a national perspective, but from, do we have a construct that every police federal agency can work within? I think that is something that has to be looked at. The police force in Idaho is different than New Hampshire. So we need to let the states figure out what it is in the best interest. The demographics of each state are different. We have to look at how that happens. There are some places that have more of a propensity, for example, in the Southwest and Texas, of Hispanics than up here. So I believe that there are places to do better. We call them TTPs in the military, which is training techniques and procedures. We should always be evolving. We should always be looking at ways that we can do better. What I don't like seeing is that it's not an indictment necessarily on an institution. Are there bad individuals in every institution that's out there? Absolutely. Should they be charged and held to the fullest extent of the law? Absolutely. But I don't necessarily believe that it's this nationwide feeling that's out there. And I think that's caused a lot of the angst that we're hearing at the doors. And people have a right to have their voices heard. I just don't think necessarily that what we've seen and how it's manifested itself is anything good to the end result of trying to have their voices heard. But I certainly don't believe that it's a downward directed mandate from the federal government how police officers need to do things. I think that has to do with the state. And then, of course, the federal agencies and the state agencies need to work together to make sure that there's common ground between the two agencies.
You believe there is systemic racism in the country, either in law enforcement or more widely?
I don't believe in systemic racism. I'll be honest with you. The litmus test for me is, are we better today than we were in 1950 or 60 or 70 or 80? And I just take it from my own personal experience. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sitting in front of you as 100% Hispanic running for Congress. That couldn't have happened for my father or my grandfather coming from Mexico. So I think we have gotten better. Are we anywhere near where we need to be? Without a doubt, no, sir. We're not. But we can do better. We have to do better. When I raise my children, and I raise them the way to make their lives better than when I had it, and they see these things and they question me too. I mean, and it's a hard discussion that I have to have with my kids. And they ask me the same question, Tom, is this something that is systemic? And I answered them, I said, there are bad people that do bad things. I don't believe every police officer is bad. I don't believe every person that's in BLM is bad. But when you have these situations that ignite this feeling, we have to have a discussion about what those feelings are and what can we do some things to try to alleviate those fears. So the short answer, sir, is no, I don't believe there's systemic racism. Are there folks out there that don't understand that they need to treat everybody with respect? Without a doubt. And those folks we need to be working on constantly on a daily basis.
I'm going to bring up another kind of hot button issue these days.
I like you, Mia. That's it. That's right.
I wanted to ask about climate change and energy policy specifically. Obviously, people are talking a lot about, the future of our environment, and a lot of that is geared towards, alternative energies. So what would you advocate in terms of, energy policy for this country moving forward?
Sure. Well, the first off, looking at our state specifically, our energy costs are some of the highest in the country. And so it's very hard for me as a small business owner to see how do I put an environment in there that I can attract manufacturing, for example, to come to the great state of New Hampshire when I've got the highest energy costs that are out there. So just from a business model, right now, New Hampshire is very difficult to try and sell it to bring people here. As a matter of fact, Sig Sauer, that's out there on the seacoast, moved the manufacturing facility to Alabama because of the lower cost of energy. Look, I'm a proponent of looking at all types of energy. I'm a believer in nuclear energy. We've got the Sept power plant. That's the largest, I believe, in the Northeast. I believe we're at a point now that we can look at something on the nuclear side. Wind power is things that are renewable and sustainable. I'm all for that. I wish I had the magic wand. When I went out to my nephew's graduation at Texas Tech in Lubbock, driving to Lubbock in wide open fields, there were literally miles and miles and miles of wind turbines that are out there, because that's what that state had as a resource that they could use, right? There's a lot of winds blowing in the panhandle of West Texas. So those things, I think we need to look at what the state gives us. How can we do that? Well, still, I think we talked about what Bill talked about is keeping our environment together. You can't have one thing at the sake of another. There's got to be some sort of compromise. But I'm a believer of renewable energy. Do some things out there that are smart. And for me, everything's on the table when it comes to energy, because at least in our state, we got to find a way to bring our energy costs down.
What about when it comes to policy? You've said you're interested in exploring these alternative options and
Right.
seeing what can be done with them. Do you have any ideas as to how you would, or how you could encourage people to use them from a public service point of view, or
Right.
how you could either mandate their use, or is that something you're not interested in?
Sure. One of the things that I find that I don't think our current congresswoman does very well is actually come back and talk to the governor. The governor is the lead executive of the state. And what are some of the things that he would need my help at the federal level to try and help his state do some things in a more economical fashion? We have these large government entities like the EPA, that they're so monolithic, and they put down these onerous regulations that I think instead of in the spirit of helping, they actually hinder. They hinder us, right? And so I believe the government's role is to provide a very loose framework, but let the states try to figure out what's in their best interest. And I would do everything that I possibly could, Mia, to work with the governor, to work with the state legislature, and what is it that they need from me in Congress to be their voice in Washington, and how can we get some federal legislation that would help my state and at the same time help some other states across the country.
If I could just ask, if it's going to be up to the states, how does a state like New Hampshire protect itself, for instance, from airborne pollution that might be coming from another state that has more lax standards? And secondly, I wonder, a big issue certainly in this part of the district has been natural gas and fracking as a source of energy. I wonder what your position on that might be.
Sure. On that first one, Tom, one of the things that I think that I bring to the table is that I still have a tremendous relationship with colleagues in the State House and in the State Senate. And if there are issues of bordering states that are doing some things that are actually affecting our state, then I think it's my job to go and find that my colleague from that state, and then we sit down and have some hard discussions and realize that, there are some things that you're doing in your state that has more lax legislation or lax laws that's actually affecting us. And is there some way we can collaborate to do that? And I got to tell you, that kind of stuff, that kind of work happens over a glass of milk and some cookies, right? It isn't sitting there throwing barbs at each other in the hallowed halls of Congress. And I think you have to establish relationships with those people that are out there. We sometimes believe that we go down just as the sole white knight on the steed, and we're the ones that's going to go ahead and fix all the problems. Truth of the matter is, there's been many white knights that have gone before me. What we need to do is find out how we collectively work together for the betterment of, for example, in our New England region, to do those things that are be beneficial, not at the expense of one or the other, but to have that kind of dialogue. And I certainly am not a shrinking violet. So if I knew that there were some things that my governor or the state legislator were telling me we needed help with, I'd be more than happy to carry that water and go have these kind of dialogues with whoever that legislative body is from the other state. The second part of your question about fracking and natural gas. Natural gas certainly is a source that we can use. I don't think that we should be over harvesting, for lack of a better term, natural gas. It's that balance to making sure that it isn't just a free for all. That all of a sudden now we come and we just deplete our resources here in the state by reducing some of our landscape. So we have to work consciously. I think what we need to do is that natural gas is part of some sort of energy. How do we balance that gas with some of the other things so that we're not dependent on one or another, but there's a harmonization between all of those opportunities that are out there for energy.
Another thing I wanted to ask about is that in the past, you have, in talking about gun violence, you've said that a lot of these shootings have their roots in mental health issues.
Yes, ma'am.
So what would you do if elected to promote, enhancements to the mental health system, both in New Hampshire and in the country, to try to address this issue?
Great question. I just saw a piece yesterday that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic hitting, that we actually had open, however you want to categorize that, open mental health beds here in the state. Which is a far cry from where we were before, where we had people waiting in emergency rooms, right, that are being dealt with mental issues that they couldn't get into the right facility and get the right treatment. Post COVID-19, now we've seen now an upside down swing. So now once again we're in that situation that we don't have enough mental health beds in the state. I believe that there's some federal dollars that can come to help those kind of things. That's something that nobody wants to talk about. It's the people talk about that in the corner of a room. It's a real issue out there, and not only just for civilians, but all the men and women that are soldiers that come back with PTS, which is another issue of mental health. We sometimes are afraid to talk about those things, Mia. I think that should be at the forefront. I think that is such a crux of many things, not of the issue of guns and violence, but just of a state of mental health, about keeping a job or being strong in their family. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it. And I believe more light needs to be shined on mental health. Hasn't been done that way in the past. And I think me as a federal legislator, I would do anything I can to help bring some of those dollars back to the state to help that issue.
So to talk about the upcoming election.
Yes, ma'am.
So the president had made some claims about election fraud with mail-in ballots that haven't been substantiated. What is your take on the use of absentee ballots?
Well, I'm 100% in favor of absentee ballot. I voted absentee until I became a resident of the great state of New Hampshire 32 years ago. My state of legal residence was Texas. And so as a military guy, I always voted absentee. Real quick question is, as an aside, is that for military members, absentee ballots need to get in earlier and actually counted, and not counted. So I believe in absentee ballots. Absolutely. I believe they provide a service for those people that can't go. And of course, Secretary Gardner opened up the aperture to allow people to request an absentee ballot if they had fear of being contracted with COVID, which I thought was a good move. My perspective comes from, I sat on the election law committee in the State House. And so I understand the validity and the value of absentee ballot. I think the question sometimes is now this mail-in ballot issue that's being presented to us. Look, I love the great state of New Hampshire. I love the fact that we fill in a bubble and we put it through an optical reader. That's almost as really sacrosanct as you can find. These electronic ballots and these electronic machines that other states use, I think, pose a different threat to their state. But for our state of New Hampshire, I'm very comfortable with where we're at. I think we did some things smartly over the last couple of years. And so I believe I have the utmost faith in Secretary Gardner and putting the right kind of election forward. So I don't have any concern right now with us here in this state.
Steve, when you talk about the electronic balloting that is more prevalent elsewhere, as being more of a threat, we've had national intelligence make clear that there were attempts to sway our election 4 years ago and even 2 years ago. Obviously, a big part of that is in trying to sway opinion through social media and such. But there were also attempts at accessing states' voting rolls and machine balloting. And so here we are on the cusp of another national election. Has enough been done to secure that process, or what else would you be in favor of doing moving forward?
Great question, Bill. One of the things that and we had a briefing from Defense Intelligence Agency was in the 2016 election, not that there's anything that's perfect, but they don't believe that one single vote was flipped electronically because they had access to the system. That being said, I'm not in favor being in the high-tech industry. I can do a lot of things as long as I have a system that's connected to a wire that's going outside. And I'm not a big fan of electronic voting. I know that there was federal dollars that were given to states that requested it because they were more susceptible because of the type of voting machines. That's why I think we're very, very spoiled in New Hampshire, where I have a black magic marker or a pencil and I fill in a bubble. Very hard to hack that. So I'm always afraid of, technology brings with its own advancements, its own risks that are out there. I'm not a big fan of electronic balloting. We had some legislation that was posed to us that you could vote from your smartphone or you could vote from your tablet. I'm not a big fan of that. So I believe that those states that are susceptible have had federal dollars to try to protect them. I don't know if they feel that they're in a better situation right now. But clearly, and we've seen it already, that you have foreign entities that are trying to persuade our minds through social media, which is what I believe the Russians did in 2016, and creating fake profiles and getting arguments going on social media, which I'm sure we've all seen that are out there. So I believe that we've done as best we can. I'm really confident that the state of New Hampshire is not going to be persuaded one way or another through a federal foreign entity, and that's because of the way our elections are cast and our votes are cast.
Well, switching gears to something completely different. You talked to us in 2018 saying that we should systematically withdraw our troops from Afghanistan, and which has yet to happen. And
Right.
Just wondering, why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Well, it's friend today, enemy tomorrow. We saw what happened in Iraq when we pulled out and left the vacuum, and everything that we thought we had made in advances was then taken up through ISIS. Look, I'm a military guy, and people kind of raise an eyebrow when I say we need to bring our troops home. One thing that I tell the young kids, and my son is on active duty right now, and he's a crew chief with the Air Force Special Ops Command, is that, the military is just an instrument of civilian policy. That's who we are. And civilian policy is the ones that need to bring us home, right? If we have a mission, give us clear guidance, let us go in, do the mission, and then come home. My father was in Vietnam twice, and we thought that was a long time. And that was just a 10,000-day war. We've been going on to this thing in the desert now going on 18 years. The toll that it takes, Cecily, on us isn't just on the soldier. It's on the families that are out there. It's on the equipment that we have. And we've spent so much money over there. And the question you have to ask is, at the end of the day, did we gain whatever it was that we intended by engaging in the first place? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that we've gotten rid of some bad actors, clearly, but situations that a bad actor leaves, another bad actor takes his or her place. So, as a military guy, I'm all for using the military, but in my opinion right now, we need to bring our men and women home. We've asked a lot of them. Some guys have spent their whole career now, almost, in rotations over in the desert. It's time to bring them home, and I would be a huge voice and advocate as a military guy. Hopefully I sit on the House Armed Services Committee to bring our men and women home in places that I think the value is no longer needed.
Speaking of those places, what places other than Afghanistan do you think that the troops should be withdrawn from?
There's so many skirmishes out there in the world, Cecily, that I couldn't tell you all of them. You'll hear of a place just like in '65 when somebody said Vietnam, nobody knew what Vietnam was. Now, there are places that we're hearing across the world that we don't even know. There's small contingents that are out there. I think today, where we used to have large fighting forces line up against an established battle line with bad guys on one side and good guys on the other, I think those days are over. I think we fight now asymmetrical warfare, but we try to fight it symmetrically, and it doesn't work that way. My father, before he passed on, he goes, if you look at what we're doing in Afghanistan, you got 6 guys on a patrol with a gun and a rifle kicking in doors. Nothing different than what we did in World War II when we were trying to clear towns in France. Yes, we have high-tech technology, but at the end of the day, there are places that I believe that some countries have to do for themselves. We can do some things in a smaller scale. I think the Korean Peninsula is one of them. North Korea is a huge threat to us, as is China. But there's some other places around the world that I think that we could either reduce our footprint altogether or bring them together, bring them home all together as once. And if need be, we're a rapid deployment force, and we can get men and women back on the ground if need be, if a situation dictated that.
Steve, your website says that one of your goals is to mitigate the ongoing real threat to healthcare affordability for every family.
Right.
What is that threat, and what do you intend to do about it?
Sure. Well, certainly the threat is two things. One, it's access, and it's cost. And I believe that there are some things that we can do right now that'll bring down the cost of healthcare. Number one, and just talking in our state, let more providers come across into the state. I think we only have 2.5 healthcare providers or healthcare insurers in our state. I think we need to lower the barriers to entry. I think people, we shop for every other type of insurance wherever we feel it's right for me and my family. For example, my homeowner's insurance, I'm not limited to what's only here in New Hampshire. If there's a provider in the state of Washington that meets my needs better, that's where I should be able to go and cost. And everything we do, Bill, we comparative shop and everything, whether it's a car, a loaf of bread, milk, doesn't matter. We don't have that kind of luxury in our state or even in our country. We're just limited to what we have. So I think we need to reduce the barriers of entry to let other providers come into our state. The second thing is to be transparency. When I get an explanation of benefit for a procedure, say like an MRI from my hospital through my insurance plan, I get this big EOB and it's like $3,000, let's just say. The truth of the matter is that procedure, for example, if I needed just an MRI, I should be able to shop an MRI the way I shop for anything else. I use dairy imaging as an example. I could go to dairy imaging and get an MRI, say, for example, $500, which cost me $3,000 through my health insurance because of the hospital. So why can't I do that kind of stuff? Why can't I go and comparative shop and get the right procedure that I need, or if I choose not to? That should be me as a consumer. We need to allow the consumer back into the equation. And I think third-party providers out there, like insurance companies, have taken the consumer and removed them from the provider, meaning the doctor. And you've got all these different people in between. And as a businessman, I know when I build something, I bill it as what's known as a wrap rate. And that means when a hospital bills you, they include things like parking garage maintenance, lights, toilet paper, electricity. All that is wrapped because it's a business that's doing cost. Now, some people may still want to do that, and if that's their choice, let them have it. But as a consumer, I should be able to do that comparative shopping for me within the best interest. And the third thing I got to believe is innovation. I think innovation drives competition. I'm a free market guy. I believe competition and allowing other things in there that allows me, a consumer, to make my choice. I think we can do those kinds of things. Certainly, and I just got to say this, I believe that I think the president just signed an executive order about pre-existing condition. Those things need to be maintained. Those things need to be covered. I think that's one of the good things that came out of the ACA. That was always a fear for people, that they had a condition that wasn't going to be covered. So I think there's some smart things we can do, Bill, to reduce the cost of healthcare, give access to everybody. It's really funny. We have the best healthcare in the world, I think, in this country, but not everybody has access to it. And we need to reduce those barriers to allow everybody to have the ability to get access to that kind of care.
Just to be clear, Steve, you use the term providers, I think, in a couple of different ways there. When you started off, I think you were saying that we don't have much competition and we need more providers. You were talking about insurers there,
yes, sir.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, you're right, Bill. Yeah. To allow more, in some insurance plans, you only get what you get because there's a limited offering. So from an insurance provider perspective, let's have as many insurance companies, and that's a state issue. I understand that, that's how the state regulation, how they allow people in, but I think we should lower that barrier to entry and let more insurance providers come in.
Would you be in favor of legislation or push legislation to increase transparency in provider pricing?
I would, like this. I think there's some legislation going through about surprise billing, where we open up a billing from a hospital and we are just floored by what's captured in that explanation of benefits and in the billing. So yeah, I just think that people need to be aware of the transparency of what the costs are, and let me as a consumer make that decision if I want to have a procedure or not.
And
If I could just follow quickly on that. One of the issues with providers, and here I'm talking about actual doctors and hospitals, for instance, in this part of the district, there's not much competition. And so you might be able to find out that you could get your knee replaced in Portsmouth for a lot less money, but you might not be in a personal position to be able to do that.
Right.
So even if you've got competition among the health insurance companies, how do you address that issue?
You mean of the access issue, Tom, about, I may be living here?
Well, that there's no competition among healthcare providers in the strict sense of the term provider as opposed to insurance companies.
Sure. Well, I think that there may be some times where you can incentivize providers to go to different parts of the state. I don't know how we would do that, but you know what? We have to look at where those providers are, and that would be a great point if, in fact, out there in the Keene area that there is a need. And we found, and we did some homework and realized that there's some things that people have to travel many miles, to your point, to Portsmouth to get a procedure. Is there a way that we can incentivize providers, meaning the doctors itself, to establish practices out there or on a 3-day-a-week basis or something that allows those constituents out there in Keene that have access to the same kind of care that somebody in Portsmouth in a more populated area would happen to be. So I'd be open to looking at something like that, absolutely. We don't make house calls anymore, but I remember a doctor coming to my house.
it's been a while since that happened, I bet.
Yes, it has.
The last thing I want to ask about healthcare, and you referenced the provision of the ACA on pre-existing conditions. Are we, as a country, do you think we are past we have to repeal and replace this, and we just want to focus on healthcare generally as a topic, or is the Affordable Care Act still an issue for you?
I think, quite frankly, that term Affordable Care Act just became a lightning rod. It became a battle cry to a we versus they kind of situation. Look, I believe that every American should have the opportunity to have access to the best healthcare that's out there. And however that manifests itself, as long as it's lower in cost and we have the ability to provide access to those people. Look, my party does want to say, that you have to go out there and say absolutely get rid of it. You can't just say get rid of it without have something in its place, because that scares a lot of citizens, scares a lot of Americans, and quite frankly, it would scare me. And I think that's not something that's prudent to do that. I think it becomes a political football. But if we're looking at doing some things that allows more affordable health care and better access for people in whatever fashion that manifests itself, that's what I'll be looking for, is being able to help almost every American that's out there, every American that's out there, to provide access to health care at an affordable rate. But ACA just happens to be a lightning rod term.
Okay. Well, it's been great to have you here again, even remotely. And
I'm jealous of Tom because I love that background. That's one of my favorite pictures.
Yeah, we were talking about making that a background for Zoom that anybody could use, which we would definitely propose that everybody do.
Sure.
One of the things that we wanted to do, I know Cecily wanted us to give you the opportunity, if people want to know more about your campaign, where do they go?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, my website is www.negron4congress.com. There's everything that's up there. We have little small vignettes. We try to put up videos out there instead of just text. And there's always an opportunity to ask us questions. We respond to every question that's asked of the campaign, because I think constituent service is probably the most important thing you do as a congressperson. Is people have questions, you need to answer them. You need to be put on the hot seat, quite frankly, because they're your boss. And I think that's one of the things that is lacking right now. And I think that's something that Congresswoman Custer doesn't do enough of. And I would love to do it is to speak to the everyday folks out there in any way, shape, or form, because they're my boss and I need to be responsible to them.
I did want to ask a couple follow-up questions if you've got a few more minutes.
I'm all yours.
Okay, just a few things you kind of already touched on that I just wanted a little more context on.
Sure.
Back at the beginning, we were talking a little bit about President Trump's response to the coronavirus pandemic, and you had said that he had done the best with the information that he had, but there's been some revelations lately that suggest he knew early on that this was going to be pretty serious. Do you feel that he maybe shouldn't have downplayed the severity of the pandemic, or do you think that maybe he should have acted on the information that he had that he chose to keep to himself?
That's a great question, and I promise you the next time he asks me for my opinion, I'll tell you. No, I think the issue is that, you know, I've heard him say that he downplayed it for whatever his reasons were. I believe he always knew that it was a situation that could quickly get out of control. We didn't know anything about the Wuhan virus and what was happening. I think he tried to take a measured approach. At the end of the day, we Monday morning quarterback. I think that where we're at right now, a lot less people have been inflicted with it. Could we have made sure that nobody got inflicted? I don't think so. So I think he did the best that he could, Mia, with the information that he had. I don't quite necessarily understand when he said that he had the information and knew how serious it was and he was trying to downplay it, maybe to prevent, you know, a scare that was going to go across the country. But where we're at right now, I think with the people, we're getting close to a vaccination. I think that's important. I think a lot of Americans want to get to that point, and that'll be a slow and steady move back to the point where we can get back to life the way we knew it pre-COVID-19.
Thank you. And then just one other question. Throughout the interview, you've referred to certain things that America is dependent on from other countries that you would like to see brought back to the U.S. Can you be specific in terms of certain industries or goods or services?
Sure. A lot of things. So first of all, in the pharmaceutical world, you know, I believe that there are opportunities for us to make those same type of pharmaceuticals here in the States and not tip them off abroad. I'm not a big fan of having dependencies, whether it's in my own business or in anything else. And I think we found clearly that we had dependencies out there, whether it was with PPE. You know, it's funny that we were so happy we were getting PPE and the PPE is coming from China. You know, so I don't know how I reconcile that for myself, but I believe now, take a step back, do we have an ability to gin up a facility to provide that kind of ability? I think we need to bring some more things into the States that we have for years and years and decades have let go offshore. And I think right now what we've seen is that situation could potentially create a vulnerability that is not one that we want to undertake.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mia.
All right. Well, again, Steve, it's been great to have you here again. Fun to talk with you.
Absolutely, sir.
And wish you well.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
So you guys watching the debate? I'm kidding.
There's a debate.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate you taking the time to have an open and honest dialogue. I think that's lacking, and so I do appreciate it that we can have this kind of dialogue in this kind of form. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.